brief background on her before she gets started today. So Ms. Stipeche was born and raised here in Houston, with her parents being immigrants from Argentina and Mexico. She attended Rice University and graduated from the University of Texas Law School. She was, prior to her, appointment as the Director of Office of Education, she was also elected to the HISD Board of Education, and was a trustee for District 8. So after that, in 2016, because of her impeccable record and her service, Mayor Sylvester Turner has appointed her to the directorship for the Office of Education. And she has been, done a lot for youth all across the city, expanding many of the programs that were in place. I just have to say, working underneath her, as an intern during my time there, I was really amazed at how open-minded, their administration and team was. And, they really care about listening to the voices of youth and things like that. So again, we're really lucky to have Ms. Stipeche here today. She's going to talk about, the digital divide here in Houston. And with that, I will hand it off to Ms. Stipeche here.
Thank you so much, Vishal. It's a pleasure and an honor to be able to join you here this morning on a beautiful Saturday, and to be able to talk to you a little bit about the digital divide. I'll be showing you a PowerPoint presentation, which I actually made to the City of Houston's Childhood and Youth Committee. So you can get an overview of what we have presented to council on this issue. But just before we go into that, I wanted to provide you with a little bit of background on what we've been experiencing since COVID-19. I'm sure you all have had experience with this as well. We know that the pandemic dramatically changed the way that we interact with our world and with one another. Prior to COVID-19, I had never really participated in a Zoom meeting, and given my delay this morning, I still appear to have some challenges. But with that being said, we have seen how the digital divide dramatically transforms the inequity, the issue of inequity that pre-existed COVID. COVID-19 pandemic actually exacerbated pre-existing inequities even further. And so what we saw was with schools, in particular, in the K through 12 system, schools had to shut down. I remember hearing reports about Japan closing down all K through 12 campuses, and this was probably in January. And so I worried that we would be experiencing something similar here in Houston. But being a former Houston Independent School District trustee, I never really grasped the concept of shutting down the entire school system for a prolonged period of time, and then trying to determine how in the world are you going to continue to allow education while the schoolhouse is closed, right? And while this was happening in the K through 12 level, it was also happening in the post-secondary system. We saw universities like Rice close and then reopen, being able to very rapidly increase the number of remote online courses that could be offered. And then by comparison, you saw the K through 12 system really struggle trying to get the online digital learning available. A tremendous amount of issues converging on that particular issue. But in this discussion, I, of course, am not a specialist in tech, right? And so, but at the Mayor's Office of Education, depending on the circumstance, you must quickly become an expert in just about everything. So at the start of the pandemic, we started having conversations with telecom companies, people that design and develop laptops and computers. So I went from having the rare conversation with Microsoft to almost daily conversations with Microsoft, Intel, other partners like Google and Apple, partners like T-Mobile, Verizon, AT&T. And what we were trying to do in Mayor's Office of Education was gather information of what low-cost, no-cost resources were available, but also serving as advocates for transforming the way people look at the digital technology in the context of education. So one way that we framed this conversation that helped me a whole lot in this discussion initially was looking at the digital divide and technology as a three-legged stool. With a three-legged stool, if you lose one leg, it doesn't stand. So when it comes to digital equity, the three-legged stool is one, the hardware, the computer or the laptop, two, the internet access, but in particular, in today's time, not any internet access, true internet access that allows high-speed content, that doesn't allow a computer to struggle, and that allows the rich interaction between a teacher and a student, or rich interaction between a citizen and being able to connect to resources and learning and training online. That requires more high-speed internet as opposed to very slow, struggling internet service, which many parts of our community still continue to struggle with. And then finally, the last one I think is one of the most challenging, but also the most exciting, and that's digital content. What is actually provided through the resources of a computer to empower an individual to be able to succeed. In the area of content, teachers and folks in instruction, that's like what we're doing right here today. But also looking at curriculum at the various levels that will be able to support and empower our community to be able to succeed. At the City of Houston, we of course provide supports to the K through 12 system. We provide supports to the post-secondary system. But our spot in which we really try to rally and provide additional supports are in those areas that are outside of those systems. And in this conversation, in the PowerPoint presentation that I'll show you in a minute, the areas that are kind of outside of the place and space of traditional education is that early childhood space, and that's the 0 to 3-year-old. And then it's also the area of those persons, those places and spaces of the opportunity youth who are either not in school and they're not working. And so we also provided information and resources to persons that are disabled, and also resources to persons who are outside of the education system that are in need of computer or technological access. And at the City of Houston, when we were trying to formulate plans, we were figuring out how can we deploy these types of laptops and tech using the assets and resources at the city to be able to help the elderly and other persons in need who do not have access, especially those that do not have the economic means or resources to be able to afford this type of technology. Big problems, right? Kind of goes all over the place. So let me show you this quick presentation so we can look at this in the context of internet access, expanding internet access in the digital divide, making sure that we close that digital divide in these two areas. Laura, do you want to go to the next slide? So as I just described, there are a lot of Houstonians, if you look at the map throughout the city of Houston, and you'll see this consistently in a lot of the conversations in the panel discussions today. The city of Houston and the mayor of the city of Houston has consistently said that he doesn't want to be a city of haves and have-nots. The city of Houston, extraordinarily large. You can fit the entire state of Rhode Island within the city of Houston's footprint. But if you also look at the map of the city, there are certain parts of town that have been traditionally underserved for prolonged periods of time. Not only is this true for the development of infrastructure for neighborhoods and supports like grocery stores and other types of necessities for people to have a quality of life in a neighborhood, the issue is also that there are many parts of town that lack internet access in terms of there might not be high internet, high-speed broadband available because towers and tech is not available in certain parts of town. And so there are certain neighborhoods that are trapped in these zones of low-speed service. So as a part of the conversations that the city has been having is how can we try to build a better structure and network working with everyone to enhance the expansion of internet access. Also, you will notice that there is a cause and effect relationship between high-speed internet access and economic growth. And that became especially apparent during COVID-19. Those that did not have access to the opportunity to remote learning or remote working were typically persons that were already struggling prior to COVID-19, and the exacerbation of this became something that was truly a matter of life or death. And families trying to determine how to get benefits and resources for their home and their family, both for learning and just for being able to work. And so, as a part of this conversation, when we started looking at this, I realized our goal is no longer to look at broadband or this digital assets and resources simply as a luxury or as it has to be viewed as a public good, just as broadly and ubiquitously available as clean water, as electricity, and other necessities that are needed for people to be able to participate in today's economy. And another thing is the access to these resources is an issue of social justice and also educational access. And so let's look at the next slide. So as I just described before, this just provides you with an overview of enhancing internet access to these various subcategories of our community and looking at it, in this broad range of it's no longer just if you're old enough to go to school or just if you're old enough to go to work. The need to enhance internet access is important for every single Houstonian, regardless of age, all ages, right? And the city of Houston, of course, being the city government, we provide services and resources and supports to all Houstonians, regardless of age. So let's see the next slide. So this is an overview just of Operation Connectivity as we were working on trying to enhance the digital divide and bringing together all of these massive partners. We started working with the Texas Education Agency to make a determination of how can we bring in these corporate partners, looking at the needs of the K through 12 system and start designing a plan of how to roll out both the laptops, the computers, the internet access. And now we're finally at a phase where we're talking to the TEA about content and digital curriculum as well. So they triaged things and we worked with the different persons in Region 4, which encompasses like over 40 school districts beyond the greater Houston area into like 5 counties. And we tried to start getting surveys of how many families need computers, how many schools need computers. And so that was the first triage that we had to do, was getting that assessment. And then once we got the triage, then we could start working with the companies, deciding on, how are we going to be able to acquire all of these, this tech to be able to deploy into the schools. And of course, the city of Houston was not just competing with Texas, we were competing with the rest of the nation. And not only were we competing with the rest of the nation, we were competing with the rest of the world. And so there was a delay in securing a lot of the tech, and we were just, extraordinarily grateful and appreciative of everybody and their patience. But with every moment that we lost in getting the information and the computers out, that's a day that a child or a family wasn't able to connect to the resources that they need. And so I will say that it was a miracle for us to get to this Operation Connectivity. It required a lot of robust communication, collaboration, and coordination. But Region 4 in the city of Houston, being a part of Region 4, set kind of the framework for what became Operation Connectivity and the deployment of tech throughout the state of Texas. And now we have heard that they are trying to use this model in other states across the country. So this is just an overview of what I was describing before about the bulk purchases and things along those lines. You can see it's like these numbers are pretty significant in terms of the investment of over $300 million in terms of new devices. Some of the funding that was, or I should say a significant amount of the funding that was used for this came from the school district's own budgets, right? But then on top of that, the state of Texas was able to release CARE Act dollars that was received from the federal government to support purchases as well. Next slide, please. This map is kind of fuzzy, and I apologize that it's not that clear, but this is an actual map that we received from the Texas Education Agency demonstrating how the computers and the laptops and the hotspots were deployed throughout the state of Texas. We just talked about the state providing, purchasing power to enhance connectivity. And what you see in this map, the one on the right shows the hotspot purchases. The one on the left shows laptops and tablets. I honed in and targeted the map, although it's a little fuzzy, to show you, Houston in particular. And you can see by comparison to the rest of the state, we even got a red dot in terms of our laptops and tablets. We were able to really work synergistically with our local community school districts to effectively deploy this plan. And I think by comparison, Houston, of course, is a large city, and but I really do believe that a lot of our connections and collaboration and our ability to communicate with one another prior to this COVID-19 incident with Mayor's Office of Education and Region 4 and other types of strategies that we've used over time really assisted us, especially in this moment of crisis. So I say that to all of you to state the importance of building a community cannot be overstated. Knowing your friends, your neighbors, your relatives, calling upon people in times of crisis is key. I would say it is absolutely, utterly essential. All right, so now this next gap shows you that even with all of that money that was invested, you still see that many students lack tech. And so this slide came in to us, I want to say maybe at the end of the year, around 2020, when we were still doing some estimations. The economically disadvantaged students need both the device and the hotspot internet access and services to be able to achieve the level of remote learning that is required in today's time. And so, as we move forward, and we've done a lot of work, there's still a whole lot of work ahead of us. But if there is one silver lining in COVID-19, it was making us all realize that as human beings, we have a responsibility to one another, to help one another, and to ensure that we can learn. And that public education is something that's so critical and key that we must make the investments to be able to allow folks to be on that level playing field. And yet we're still working on leveling that playing field. So the next slide, please, Laura. So long term is what I was saying. If you also looked at that map of Texas, you'd see that there were some areas that were totally white, right? And those are areas in rural Texas that they don't even have towers, right? And so you'll often hear the governor just recently in a state of the state address talked about trying to enhance digital equity and access to more rural parts of Texas. You've also probably heard that in the presidential, President Biden talking about the need to enhance digital connectivity to all communities. But the one thing that I will say is that if you look at the deployment of devices in our region, Region 4, which is, as I said, that large, there are several educational service regions in the state of Texas, according to the TEA. The Houston's region carries 20% of all children in the state of Texas. So I'm really pleased and happy that, we've got a lot of activity going on here. We need to push further, but also these other parts of Texas do need help in terms of setting up infrastructure. So there's been conversations of trying to work with folks to get this low cost, high speed internet access throughout the state of Texas. Next slide, please. This is also just a continuation of the discussion of just enhancing the, technology access.
Oh, someone came.
Not looked at other areas that I've described. And this was, we're going to do a quick run through of early childhood education. And so in early childhood education, I want to show you this. First, when you're born, these are your synapses and your neurons in your brain. At the age of 3, you got the most neurons and brain development that you're going to have probably in your entire life, right? By the time you're at age 14, you'll see how these structures and frameworks start to take a pattern. And so this critical framework from birth until the age of 5 sets motor skill development, social emotional learning, all of these different frameworks for the rest of a child's life. And that critical time frame is outside of the K through 12 space. And there is no one other than the Texas Workforce Commission that really, holds this area of funding for childhood education. And so I stress the importance of early childhood education, looking at the achievement gap. If you see that chart, looking at that chart to the left, you can see this demonstrates that when children are born, they are near level. But as time grows, you will see that the achievement gap starts to grow and grow over time. And it starts in this early time frame. So the next slide, please. How does COVID-19 impact babies and their families? Well, this report, which was conducted by Dr. Keonta Moore at Rice University and Dr. Christopher Greeley from Texas Children's Hospital, they said, families need to be able to access the benefits and resources that they need so that way they can help their children develop and learn and grow during this critical time frame. But imagine if a family doesn't have access to a computer, they don't have access to food, housing, benefits, resources, they don't know how to get COVID-19 vaccination testings or things along those lines. Where do they go? What do they do? That stress compromises the ability for them to be able to help nurture and raise their child. And so we were talking at the city how it was important for us to make sure that we help deploy computers and internet access to the families that had babies, right? Who would have thought, right? And so the next slide, please. So this is an example of Harvard University talking about ways in which you can help with the development of your baby's brain. The problem is, look, on the bottom, all of them are linked to internet resources. All of them are linked to YouTube and different. If you don't have a computer, how are you going to get these benefits? How are you going to be able to learn how to practice, serve, and return, maintain social connections, or taking a break and taking care of yourself, right? Next slide, please. So, we wanted to say, how can we become strong advocates for helping all families have the same level of digital connectivity to provide the supports that are needed to help them? So the next slide, please. We go into another area, Opportunity Youth. I don't know if many of you, I didn't know about Opportunity Youth until I started working at the city, if you can imagine that. Opportunity Youth are those young people that are they're disconnected from school, they're disconnected from work. And Houston has one of the largest populations of Opportunity Youth in the country, with about 111,000 young people that for one reason or another are in this situation, right? So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. The next slide will show you, these are areas in the greater Houston area and Harris County and Houston that have the highest level of Opportunity Youth. And that's many of Opportunity Youth have graduated from high school. They're disconnected from the system from one reason or another. They're not working. And so, we at the Mayor's Office of Education are looking at ways to try to help and support and empower Opportunity Youth so that way they can re-engage in the system, get access to continued learning, and get access to jobs. The problem is, it's like if they don't have a computer or internet, how are they going to do it? So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. Pre-COVID, we were celebrating some achievements in terms of the Opportunity Youth rate declining. There was across the country about 5 million Opportunity Youth nationally. After COVID-19, the number increased to 18 million. Next slide, please. Go ahead and show the next slide. This just saying, responding to the pandemic in the city of Houston requires us to really work together in ensuring that we take particular notice of all communities, even those that are, beyond what we typically look at as traditional educational communities. We at the City of Houston and the HER Task Force, we're looking at internet vouchers, the hardware, and expanding the Wi-Fi access. But you as Houstonians, you as youth leaders, I would say, please consider ways to help us solve this problem. You can, as a person who is knowledgeable of how to use tech, we really could rely upon young leaders to be able to assist us in designing and developing programs to enhance digital literacy for those that are given internet access hardware and computers. There are many folks that might get a computer and they don't know how to use it. So the challenges are always large and looming, but we have the creativity of our community, especially our youth, to be able to help us solve and tackle these problems, especially in these unique times. I can't thank you enough for participating in this conversation today. And, this is just an example of how many of us must work together in terms of public-private partnerships and all different persons, places, and spaces to allow us to have borderless classrooms for all persons in the city of Houston. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patch. That was a great presentation. I hope everyone in here kind of took away from the presentation. I think there were some questions in here, Mr.
Oh
Patch.
yeah, sure.
Um, if you could, I don't know, give like some answers off the top of your head. I think Gardelia, if you want to come off of mute and ask.
If not, it's okay. I can say it. So Gardelia Roman asked, has the digital divide affected our ability to spread information about COVID-19 and vaccinations?
Yes, yes, it has. I would say that there was a story that came out recently in NPR that I watched, and it said, how is it that in communities that are so adversely impacted by COVID-19, that many of the persons that live in the community cannot sign up and get the vaccinations? And so you have persons from more affluent parts of town that do have tech driving into neighborhoods where they've set up vaccination sites where the very persons in the neighborhood that should be getting cannot get, right? What's causing that? I told somebody, I said to my sister, when we were talking, I said, anybody that has tech is going to have an advantage like no tomorrow. When the city of Houston first launched the vaccination hotline, there were so many people that called that number that it basically crashed. So as a solution, they decided to quickly set up a website. When the website was set up, people could sign up very, very quickly. But those that had computers and tech were the ones that signed up. So how do you solve that problem? Very good question.
Yes, and then we have another question from Leah Moreno. Leah, do you want to ask your questions? Are you able to? Then I will go ahead and ask. What percentage of at-risk youth do you think have either fallen through the cracks in the commotion or have gone unaccounted for?
So I think that, we're still trying to assess the exact figures, but I would say the prior to COVID-19, the city of Houston, had a very large at-risk population. We've seen some preliminary figures and discussions with the superintendents about, students that have basically not returned. And that is, we've been talking to some partners about what can we do to assist in designing some systems and programs to provide support. Schools have been calling families directly. Schools have been, sending out messages. So there's been, some coordinated efforts to try to make sure that young people are, reached and their families are reached. It's an ongoing challenge. And once again, we would really appreciate your input, advice, and support in trying to determine more effective ways of being able to reach out, include families.
Yeah, and Leah had that just to follow up on what you've mentioned, Juliet. Are there any follow-up plans to try and identify and help these students?
Yes, so that, like I said, the school districts have been working. They can identify families that, were enrolled last year or at certain parts of the year, and then, fall off the map. We know that, in our prior experience with Hurricane Harvey, there is a significant amount of mobility going on. After Hurricane Harvey, that people were displaced because of the storm, but with COVID-19, people are displaced because of eviction. Which should have, I'll give you one example. There was an eviction moratorium that was issued by the federal government that came also into the state of Texas. There were folks that didn't have internet access or resources, and they didn't know how to file for the eviction moratorium. And so when families become displaced, or if they're looking for more affordable rents, they will leave one side of town and move straight to another. And that's another thing that compromises the ability for school districts to track where youth are going when they move from one part of town to the other. And we've been talking to folks and suggesting of, how can we work together more closely in trying to provide supports as a region, understanding this information, because there's a lot more mobility that goes on. One family may have 6 children that go to 6 different school districts.
Mm-hmm. I think one question, I think Miss Karen put it in the chat. I think I'll try to combine both of them. Is there any like programs that either the city or like other, workforce partners that provide like some kind of technical training so that students can like learn how to build apps and then kind of help out with these resources? Or do you know of anything like that?
So there, okay, this is another thing that makes Houston so wonderful and awkward at the same time. I have a dear friend whose name is Adib Barkawi, and Adib runs a program called Pro Unitas, right? And he gives this, he made this statement that has stuck with me for the rest of my life, right? And it's, Houston is a city that is resource rich but system poor. All right, so what does that mean? We've got resources, you know, by comparison to Boston. Boston is known for education. Why Harvard and all the other amazing institutions? Houston has an amazing number of post-secondary institutions. Rice, U of H, TSU, Prairie View. I mean, you've got it out the wazoo here. But it's like when Mayor had the first meeting of all of these presidents and chancellors of the institutions of higher learning, and we sat down together, it was like, how can we help each other? So we want to be able to know what programs already exist, like the one that you just described, Vishal, that we can then use to leverage and build capacity at the city. And so it's been an ongoing process in our office trying to catalog and meet and figure out how we can serve as connectors. I tell Laura and Vishal, being the leader that he is, in creating the Mayor Student Leader Alliance, Mayor Student Leadership Alliance is another example of reaching out and talking to leaders at the university level, so that way we can know what's going on in terms of activities and creativity and different types of programs, and how we can enlist your knowledge to be able to help us as well. I have reached out to the University of Houston students to see how we can design and develop something like what you've just described. It's a slow process, but we are interested in building those types of connections.
Juliet, another question coming in privately that makes me think of a question that I had when I was younger, right? And just feeling like the government is not doing enough, right? Why can't we do more? Why can we have a greater scope? And I don't know if you can address that, right? Like, I know that you all are trying, you have some projects, but it's not reaching everyone.
Yeah, we can't move. It's like we always want, my philosophy in life is, we should never have low expectations. We should never have low expectations for our students. We should never have low expectations for our community. We should never have low expectations for any living creature on this earth. Any, and that's just my overarching philosophy. I think that the system of low expectations comes from a system of racism, of injustice, of things along those lines, right? So I'm a person that ever since I was a child had this very rosy aspirational perspective of government. My parents, are from Mexico and Argentina. They came to this country in search of opportunity. They loved this country with its warts and all. But it was like they came here in search of hope and opportunity. And so I was like, how can I help this country? How can I serve? How can I make government, function as it should? There has, and I'm gonna get a little radical here, but I'm gonna try to be very simple in answering this. There has been, good government is extraordinarily important in providing for the needs and services and supports of building a better tomorrow. Good government is essential in investments to ensure that our schools are functioning properly, that our teachers and the support staff have the pay and the skills and the training and the supports they need to help the next generation of children succeed. And as demographic changes are dramatically changing over time, we have to redesign the system to respond. But there has been a systematic attempt over time to reduce the impact of government, making it smaller, putting more money into corporations. There's the philosophy that government is taking away money and taxes need to be low, and there should not be more investment in the big bureaucracy of government. COVID-19 demonstrates what happens when you cut government services too much. The achievement gap, I think, is that is growing and is very problematic, and the causing of children that are falling through the cracks, which is a horrible description, but that's because of a system that is inadequately supported and funded over time. And so this rapid deployment of the laptops and the internet access, that could have happened over time already. That's something that could have pre-existed, but because of this philosophy of to each his or her own, we end up being a less structured, empowered community. And so I suggest, I advocate that we must be involved in good government to create the government that we want. And your voice and choice is important. And I talk to youth all the time. It is extraordinarily important for you to become involved, because the future, of course, it needs to be designed based on your unique needs. Every system is going to be delayed by 40, 20, 10 years, depending on the persons who are sitting at the table. I'm 46 years old. I'm a dinosaur. I need y'all's help. I need your new way of thinking. I need your new way of being, so that way I can design systems in place that are more appropriate. So to go back to Laura's question, why aren't things happening faster? Well, we need your voice at the table. Why aren't things happening faster? We need you to advocate for better government. Why are things not moving fast? Because it took a long time for us to get to this point. We can move faster if you're involved and you participate, and you can help us pick up the pace. You certainly can run faster than me, and that's true both mentally, physically, and emotionally. So come on and get involved, and let's see what you can solve today. Give me that help that I need. I motivate you, and you motivate me, and I hope that today's talk has helped motivate you.
Yeah, but I think you summed it up very quickly, great at the end there, Mr. Petch. So again, we really want to thank you for taking time out of your day to come speaking to us. Our students, I think a lot of them have been messaging me and kind of saying like, Ms. Stipeche is really great. Why is she doing this for us? I know she's trying to help us students. And so, I want to relay what they're thinking to you. Thank you very much again. We really appreciate your service. And, I think it's very much needed, especially in these uncertain times like COVID.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Stipeche, Ms. Stipeche. We will, if anyone has questions or anything, I'll try to send them your way. But again, we really appreciate it. For our students on the call, I think our next panel with Dr. Lopez is going to begin in 5 minutes. So just stay on real quick and we will get everything set up.
Bye, y'all. Thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you.